Do you experience much pushback or much conflict from religious people who don't like the fact that you describe things in that way, that didn't need an intelligent force or intelligent creator to exist?
It's an interesting question because the biological community, people like Richard Dawkins and the like, I think have really borne the brunt of the religious pushback because they're dealing directly with the phenomena of life. And that's the precious commodity that somehow we want to be sacred. And therefore, our religious sensibility will push back on it just being the mindless laws of physics and evolution, yielding, life on planet Earth. They haven't pushed as hard on the quantum physicists and the cosmologists as they have on the biologists. But I have had conversations. Many of them are respectful as opposed to antagonistic, where the view is that I am wrong-headed, that I am missing the point. And some of these religious folks are fantastically accomplished scientists.
That's weird.
Yeah. I mean, I went to a gathering. I think I can talk about it now. It was closed-door gathering. You weren't meant to describe it.
Hope you don't get sued by this one, too.
Yeah, that's right. I'm really opening myself here. I thought it was called Science and the Spiritual Quest. And it was a bunch of scientists that were being brought together. And I thought it was going to be an interesting but ultimately one-note meeting. I thought everybody's going to basically say the same thing. There could be a God. There's no evidence for a God. We've got the laws of physics. And we're going to just press forward under the assumption that physics is all there is until the clouds part and God reveals him or herself or itself to us. And at that point, we may change our tune. It was not one note. I was the only person who had that perspective in the room. Everybody else was coming at religion from a very different way of thinking about the world. In fact, there's one Nobel laureate in the room who got up and sang psalms as part of his presentation. And I was sitting there and I was like, what is happening here? This is so unexpected to me. And what it really meant was I was so close-minded into the varieties of religious engagement that happen in the world. And it opened my eyes. And there's one Nobel laureate in particular, I did say to him at the end, I said, when you look at me and you hear my view, what do you think? And he kind of put his arm around me in an avuncular way and said, you're a real smart guy and you don't understand the true reality. And I think ultimately you will because you're open-minded and you're on a journey. And I hope that your journey will finally take you to the place where I have been for many years. That was so unexpected that this Nobel laureate, who I respected for his concrete mathematical and experimental work, saw the world completely differently.
Now, was there a spectrum of belief?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But I was the one who was far out.
Only one.
I was the one who
you
was
were untethered.
Yeah, I mean, I came in there, I was like, whoa, and now clearly they arranged the meeting to have a spectrum of perspectives. I mean, this is not something that was randomly designed and it just so happened. But it was an eye-opener. And from that, I went to read, do you know William James's book, Varieties of Religious Experience?
No.
Yeah. So it's a book that William James, a great psychologist, wrote in 1902. And it was based on a series of lectures I think he gave in Scotland. And it is the most heartfelt and rational approach to religion and science that I think has ever been written. And yet most people don't know much about it. Because what he does is he goes through and he documents through his own research and through reading biographies and interviewing individuals the vastly different ways that people think about religion and why they think about religion and the value that religion has in their lives. And when you read that book, it doesn't convert me. I haven't changed my views on whether or not there is a God, but it has changed my views on the value of a religious sensibility, the role that it plays in people's lives. Now, look, it can be, you talk to people like Sam Harris and it's a destructive force in the world. And it has been a destructive force in some ways. But that's not the full story. Right. A fuller story is that for some individuals, it gives a connection to a historical lineage that's deeply valued. For some individuals, it puts their life in a larger setting that allows them to be in the world in a more productive way. So there are a whole range of roles that religious engagement can play. The problem is when you start to pit it against scientific insight, then you run into trouble. But religion was never developed to give us factual information about the world. Religion will never give us the electron magnetic moment to 9 decimal places. That's the purview of scientific investigation. And if you can keep these straight in your mind, there's a definite and powerful role for a religious sensibility in the world.
Yeah, I feel like it gives people in a lot of ways a scaffolding for ethics and morality and allows them some alleviation of anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
It gives them a feeling of purpose. But like you said, as long as it's not conflicting with rigid scientific reality.
Yeah,
like
right.
Provable scientific reality.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, it's a funny thing. You know, Richard Dawkins, I don't know, have
I've
you had him on the
here,
program?
yeah.
So you know that his MO in the world is very anti-religious.
Yes.
I think he would agree with me on that. I don't want to put words into his mouth. But I did an event with him in New York, the Beacon Theater. I don't know, it was maybe a year ago or something like that. And it was very interesting because in a one-on-one conversation, his views were very similar to mine. I felt, look, we don't agree in totality, but I was saying to him, there are times I go around the world and I will do things that are utterly irrational. I'll knock on wood for good luck. I'll speak to my dead father. I know that he's not really there. I'll pray to God on occasion if I think that I could use that backup. Not because I think there's some bearded individual in the sky. It's just a behavioral tendency that I find to be comforting and useful. And I said this to Richard, and he said, I totally get it. I was like, what? He was like, I totally get it. He said, in fact, I don't like to sleep in a house that has a reputation as being haunted. you know, and for me, it was such a beautiful human moment. It was such a beautiful human moment where we were just like being human beings.
Right.
And he said, we're both sinners. And I agree. We are both sinners in that sense because we know how the world works. We know this doesn't make any sense. And yes, it's still part of somehow how we behave in the world. And I think there's a value to recognizing that is what it means to be human. You will engage in the world in ways that are not necessarily strictly adhering to some rational perspective of how the scientific world operates.
I would love to see Richard Dawkins outside of a haunted house saying,
right.
I'm not going in there.
Yeah, exactly. You know. Yeah. So it's all just to say that I kind of feel like there are many pathways toward insight in the world. There are many ways to live a life. Mm-hmm. There are many ways to come to terms with our own impermanence. And it's not as though something is right or something is wrong. It's a question of, is it useful to you? And I think that we have to be very open-minded in the kinds of behaviors that we allow to happen in the world. Even Ramtha, it's nutty stuff.
Yeah.
But if some of those individuals who go there find that it allows them to live in the world in a more productive way, alleviating anxiety, feeling like they're on a spiritual quest, so be it.
Yeah, that's the thing it's hard for people to understand if you're not in that space, that headspace that they are. You don't need this structure. But for some people, even Scientology or something along those lines, it seems loopy on paper, can provide them with legitimate structure and benefit their lives in a tangible way that they could describe to you.
Yeah, exactly. And my feeling is that if there was, and I don't know this to be the case, and maybe some biologists will push back on this, but if there was a race of, for want of a better word, Vulcan-like individuals who approach the world in a completely rational manner, evaluating the data, figuring out the most sensible course of action, competing against a crazy group of individuals like us who will come up with wild fictional ideas, gods in the heavens, demons haunting the world. I think it's the latter group that ultimately would triumph, because with that kind of freedom of thought, you get novelty,
Yes.
you get ingenuity, you get creativity. And so I feel as though this is part and parcel of who we are and why we have survived. And to sort of come at the world with a scientific club that's meant to smash away anything that disagrees with the scientific worldview is an unfortunate way of looking at the world.
Yeah, there's something about creativity that it doesn't necessarily have to abide by any laws of logic, and it can still be beneficial.
Yeah, and that's why
Yeah.
it's so stunning
Right.
when somebody comes up with something. It's like, where did that come from? It
Right.
didn't come from a rational approach to working out, Brahms' Third Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
It emerged from the churning emotions of an individual who happens to be made up of trillions of particles guided by physical law, responding to the environment, which is impinging his senses with an incredible array of influences. And through that whirl emerges this spectacular piece of music. That's breathtaking.
Yeah.
Utterly breathtaking.
Yeah, and it's amazing what that music can inspire
Yeah.
as it reaches out to, X amount of people and then causes different thoughts in their mind.
Yeah.
And then that causes in turn another branch of creativity, another
Yeah.
new line of thinking that they might have never pursued before.
Yeah, and that to me establishes that the notion that language is the only way that we can know about the world. Wittgenstein had this perspective, that the limits of my language, limits of my world. That seems to me utterly wrong. I mean, the experience of music or the experience of cogitating about the world, but not trying to overlay a narrative upon it, just feeling your way into reality, reveals things about the world that I think are beyond linguistic.